I never thought I'd RSVP to the wedding of the man who broke my heart, especially when the bride was my little sister. But when that invitation arrived, cream paper, gold lettering, their names intertwined like it was always meant to be, I didn't cry. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because pain, when it's sharp enough, stops sounding like grief and starts sounding like disbelief. And maybe, just maybe, that was the moment I knew I wouldn't run from it anymore. I walked straight into that ballroom, wearing red. This isn't a story about revenge. It's about the silence after betrayal, the kind of silence that reshapes a woman from the inside out. It's about the kind of love that doesn't come to fix you, but meets you exactly where you are. And it's about how showing up when everyone expects you to fall apart is sometimes the loudest thing you can do. If you've ever been the sister left out, the woman underestimated, or the name they stopped mentioning in family dinners, then this story is yours too. Tell me, have you ever walked into a room where no one expected you to matter and stayed anyway? Because that's where this story begins. My name is Sabrina Ellis, and this is how my sister's wedding became the beginning of my real life. Have you ever walked into a room where no one expected you to matter and stayed anyway? If that's you, tell me where you're watching from in the comments, because stories like this, they're never just mine. And if you're ready to reclaim your own voice, make sure to subscribe. We're walking this together. Betrayal doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers from the screen of a man's unlocked phone. I still remember the weight of the ring. It wasn't heavy, just familiar. A year of wearing it had trained my fingers to rest against its curve, like a quiet promise I carried everywhere. Until that morning. I'd flown back from New York a day early to surprise him. You know those rom-com moments where the woman walks in, holding takeout and wearing that hopeful smile? Yeah, that was me. Except, in my version, there wasn't anyone waiting with open arms. Just an apartment that smelled like last night and a phone buzzing on the coffee table. I'm not the snooping type. I wasn't looking for anything. But you don't need to look when the words are glowing on the screen, lined up like little daggers. Last night was incredible. Miss you already. Can't wait to tell everyone. The name underneath? Vanessa Ellis. My sister. I didn't cry. Not then. I just sat there, still holding the takeout, watching the screen light up with a truth I hadn't asked for. When he walked in with coffee and bagels, his face went pale, like the truth had finally caught up with him too. "You're home early," he said. Apparently not early enough. That conversation, it unraveled everything. 3 months, he admitted. Just happened. Didn't mean to hurt you. We didn't plan it. No one ever plans to betray you, but they still do it. With the same hands that once cupped your face and called you home. And when the silence fell, after the shouting, the excuses, the final twist of the ring off my finger, it wasn't just between us. It seeped into everything, into my phone that stopped ringing, into my family, who suddenly didn't know what to say, into the mirror, where I couldn't meet my own eyes. Because betrayal doesn't end in one afternoon. It echoes. It rewrites birthdays, memories, holidays. And in my case, it even rewrote what it meant to be someone's sister. But the deepest cut wasn't his lie or her disloyalty. It was the way the people I loved most chose silence over truth. And that's when I learned. Sometimes the wound doesn't come from the weapon. It comes from the ones who watched you bleed and still asked you to smile. And that silence, it didn't just isolate me. It changed the way I saw my entire family. Sometimes the people you expect to defend you are too busy keeping the peace to keep you safe. The day after everything came out, my mother called me like nothing had happened. Her voice was soft, careful, like she was navigating a fragile vase instead of a daughter whose world had cracked in half. "Honey," she began, "I know this is hard, but these things happen. These things happen. Like your fiancé sleeping with your sister is in the same category as losing a suitcase or burning dinner." I said nothing. Not because I didn't have words. God knows I had plenty. But because I could hear it already in her voice. The desperation not to choose sides, not to face discomfort, not to admit that one daughter had cut the other to pieces. Later, at a forced family dinner, my mother tried to play mediator, offering more wine, changing subjects mid-sentence, laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. Vanessa held Cameron's hand across the table like they were debuting a new perfume ad, not the aftermath of betrayal. And my father? He sat still, silent, jaw clenched. He didn't look at Cameron once, didn't speak to Vanessa until the very end, and when he did, it was with the kind of quiet thunder only a man deeply ashamed can carry. "No daughter of mine would do this to her sister," he'd said. And for a moment I thought, finally, someone sees me. But clarity in private isn't the same as courage in public. A few weeks later, even he began softening. "She's still my daughter," he told me over lunch, eyes heavy with guilt. "I have to walk her down the aisle. I can't disown her." I nodded. But inside, I felt a new kind of loneliness. Because when families are forced to choose between truth and peace, they'll often choose the version that requires the least confrontation, even if it means stepping over your heartbreak like it's a crack in the sidewalk. And maybe that's what hurt the most. Not just the betrayal, but the suggestion that my pain was less important than keeping the photo albums looking intact. Like forgiveness was a performance, and I was the only one who hadn't learned my lines. I stopped attending family gatherings. I muted the group texts. I needed silence, but this time, it was mine. A boundary, not a punishment. A decision not to force myself to smile in rooms where my name had become uncomfortable. And yet, even in that distance, the pressure didn't stop. Calls from relatives, passive-aggressive messages disguised as concern, whispers that I was holding on to anger too long. But no one asked the right question. Not once did anyone say, "What do you need to heal?" Because it's easier to pressure a woman into pretending she's fine than to sit with the discomfort of what was done to her, especially if the person who hurt her is wearing a white dress in 6 months. So I built my own space, quiet but solid. And in that space, something unexpected began to happen. I didn't just mourn what I lost. I started to remember who I was before they tried to tell me what I should tolerate. And from there, I stopped trying to get an apology from people too comfortable to offer one. I started building something that no one could take credit for but me. Some women scream, others sharpen their eyeliner and book the therapist instead. I didn't cut my hair right away. I didn't post cryptic quotes on Instagram or torch his belongings in some dramatic movie scene meltdown. What I did was quieter, but no less defiant. I started waking up at 5 a.m., not because I suddenly became a morning person, but because insomnia and grief make strange roommates. And if I couldn't sleep, I could sweat. A friend recommended a personal trainer, an ex-military guy who didn't ask questions. He just handed me weights and said, "Push." So I did. 3 mornings in, I realized this wasn't about looking better. It was about not feeling helpless in my own skin. There's something powerful about watching your own strength return, 1 rep at a time. Then came the lipstick, a shade of red I'd never worn before, too bold, too bright, At least that's what I used to think. But the first time I wore it to the office, something shifted. Not because they looked at me differently, but because I looked at myself differently. This wasn't camouflage. This was war paint. But while my body was rebuilding its armor, my mind still carried the wreckage. That's when I made the call to a therapist named Dr. Clara Bennett. I didn't expect much. I was polite, guarded, a little skeptical. But she asked one question in our first session that stopped me cold. Sabrina, when was the last time you felt safe and seen at the same time? I didn't have an answer. And that, more than anything, told me how much work I had to do. Therapy wasn't linear. Some weeks I walked out lighter. Other times, I left feeling like someone had taken a crowbar to the parts of me I'd nailed shut. But I kept going, because healing isn't always pretty or photogenic. Sometimes it's just showing up again and again for the parts of yourself you abandoned to keep others comfortable. Dr. Bennett helped me name the things I'd been taught to swallow. That boundaries aren't cruelty. That anger isn't failure. That grief isn't weakness. It's evidence that you cared more than they did. And slowly, I stopped asking how they could do this to me. I started asking what I wanted to do for myself. I wasn't ready to love again. But I was ready to stop pretending I was broken beyond repair, because I wasn't. I was just unfinished. And that realization didn't come from looking in a mirror. It came one Tuesday night in Dr. Bennett's softly lit office when she smiled and said, "Maybe the best version of you hasn't even arrived yet." I didn't know it then, but she was right. And that version? She didn't just wear red lipstick. She wore her name like a vow. And soon, she'd meet someone who would recognize it. He didn't fall in love with the way I looked in red. He fell in love with the part of me I hadn't shown anyone in months, my quiet. I met him at a charity auction. I hadn't planned to go, but my boss insisted, and I figured if I could survive my sister's betrayal, I could survive an open bar and polite small talk. I spilled champagne on him within the first 10 minutes. He laughed. Not the kind of laugh that makes you feel small. The kind that says, "Well, this is life, isn't it? A little messy, but still worth showing up for." His name was Noah Hart. Tall, clean cut. The kind of man who wore suits like second skin but didn't check his reflection every 5 minutes. He was an architect, recently back from 3 years designing public housing projects overseas. And when he asked me what I did, I didn't recite my resume. I just said, "I'm in marketing, and I'm recovering from a very public humiliation." He smiled. "Then I guess we're both in the business of rebuilding." I don't know what made me say yes to coffee. Maybe it was the way he didn't flinch when I was blunt. Or the fact that, for once, I didn't feel like I had to perform strength. Noah didn't compliment my dress. He complimented the way I asked questions. He didn't offer to fix me. He just listened and didn't rush to fill the quiet. One night, after our 3rd date, I told him everything. About Cameron, about Vanessa, about the wedding invitation sitting unopened on my kitchen counter. He didn't give advice. Didn't say, "You should go," or "Don't let them win." He just said, "If you decide to walk into that wedding, I'll walk in with you. But not as a prop, as your partner." There was no flourish in his voice, just steadiness, like a man who wasn't afraid of complicated stories, because he carried a few of his own. That's when I realized he didn't love the mask. He loved the woman who had the courage to take it off, the one who had cried in therapy and lifted weights in silence, the one who still felt the sting, but stood anyway. Noah didn't rescue me. He met me at eye level, and in doing so, he reminded me I didn't need to be flawless to be loved. I just needed to be true. And that truth? It gave me the clarity I'd been avoiding. Because once you've been seen like that, really seen, you stop needing revenge. You start seeking closure. And that wedding invitation? It stopped feeling like a threat. It started feeling like a test I could finally pass. On my terms. Some envelopes don't carry joy. They carry flashbacks. It arrived on a Tuesday, thick paper, gold lettering. My name, still intact. Their names, intertwined. Vanessa Ellis and Cameron Brooks request the honor of your presence. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Not because I was shocked. By then I'd accepted that they were going through with it. But because that envelope didn't just contain an invitation. It contained a memory I hadn't agreed to relive. Inside was a handwritten note. Sabrina, it would mean the world to have you there. I hope, in time, you'll see this for what it is. Love always finds a way. Love? Or lack of boundaries dressed in pastels? I didn't reply. Not that day, not the next. Instead, I sat with the discomfort, like Dr. Bennett had taught me. I didn't numb it. I named it. I wrote down everything that letter made me feel. Anger, grief, shame, and oddly, a flicker of pride. Because I was no longer the woman who would show up just to keep the family from feeling awkward. And yet, the pressure started, predictably. My mother's voice on the phone, breaking like a worn-down bridge. Sabrina, this rift. It's tearing us all apart. My father, more careful but no less clear. I don't like what they did, but she's still my daughter, and you're still my compass. You don't have to go, but if you do, I'll be proud of your strength. Even my cousin Diana chimed in, because there's always a Diana. Uncle Dean bet $50 you won't show up. Prove him wrong. And somewhere in that tangle of guilt, expectation, and barely veiled manipulation, I made my decision. Not for them, not for appearances, not even for Noah. I'd go because I had changed, and I wanted them to see it. Not in my dress, not in my date, but in the way I could enter a room built on my pain without losing my peace. It wasn't a performance. It was a reclamation. But here's the thing no one tells you. Even when you choose to go on your own terms, the wound remembers. The night before, I couldn't sleep. The day of, I felt like my skin didn't quite fit. Because triggers don't care how much you've healed. They only care that you remember. But I had something this time I didn't have before. A partner who didn't try to protect me from the fire. He stood with me in it. And when we stepped into that rooftop cocktail hour, his hand in mine, my spine tall, my silence steady, every eye that turned, every whisper that rippled, none of it shook me, because I hadn't come for them. I had come for her, the woman I used to be, the one who'd once thought she wouldn't survive this. I wanted her to see how far we'd come, and how much further we were about to go. Have you ever said yes to something, not for them, but for yourself? Let me know in the comments. I read every word, and if this resonates, don't forget to subscribe. There's more to come. Some people raise a glass to celebrate themselves. Others raise it to restore what someone tried to take. The ballroom was a blur of florals and fairy lights. Every corner had been manicured to perfection. White roses spilling over crystal vases, string quartet humming in the background. Even the menu looked familiar, because it was. It had been my Pinterest board, now with her name printed on it. I wasn't seated in the back. Number Vanessa had placed me near the front, just far enough to remind me I wasn't part of the show, but close enough to feel every spotlight. It wasn't generosity, it was strategy. Noah, as always, sat beside me, not performing, not pretending, just present. The speeches began. The maid of honor gushed. The best man stumbled through anecdotes about Cameron's indecision and finally choosing right. It was all polite, practiced, painfully careful. And then Vanessa took the microphone, unscripted, a little flushed from champagne, a lot hungry for attention. "I just want to say something," she began, gaze sweeping the room until it landed, predictably, on me. "Cameron and we didn't have the most traditional start, but sometimes love finds you in the most unexpected places." The guests chuckled, unsure whether this was a confession or a prelude. He might have settled before, but this— she reached for his hand. "This is what forever looks like." My stomach dropped, not from pain, from the sheer audacity. I could feel eyes turning, some pitying, some curious, some enjoying the spectacle like it was part of the entertainment package. Before I could react, before I could even inhale the humiliation, Noah stood up, champagne in hand, calm, grounded, unshaken. "May I?" he asked, his voice cutting clean through the noise. All heads turned. Cameron nodded, hesitant. Vanessa looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. Noah raised his glass. "For those I haven't met, my name is Noah Hart, and I'm honored to be here tonight, as Sabrina's partner." There it was, clear, confident, no explanation, no apology. I've only known Sabrina for a short time, but in that time, I've witnessed a kind of strength most people never have to develop. She chose to be here today, to sit with Grace in a room that once tried to erase her, and that takes courage. The room went silent. Even the clinking stopped. She's not anyone's before. She's not what someone settled from. She's what you build toward when you're ready for something real. Someone at the back gasped. Another murmured, "Wow." Noah wasn't done. "I design buildings for a living, and let me tell you, weak foundations don't last. But Sabrina, she doesn't just stand tall. She holds up others, even when they've tried to collapse her." He turned to me then, just me, and smiled. "I didn't come here to make a point. I came here because the woman beside me is worth showing up for, every day." He raised his glass. "To character, to courage, to the kind of love that doesn't arrive loud, but stays steady." And with that, he sat down. And for the first time that night, no one looked at Vanessa. They looked at me, and not with pity, but with respect. That moment didn't erase what they'd done. It didn't rewrite history, but it reminded everyone in that room, including me, that losing something doesn't mean you lost your worth. It just means someone else couldn't carry the weight of it. And maybe, just maybe, that toast didn't change the couple, but it changed the narrative. And that's when I knew I didn't need an apology. I didn't even need closure. I had something better: witnesses. And as we left that ballroom, I thought that would be the moment I'd remember most. But what came next, the confrontation behind the bathroom door, was something I never saw coming. Forgiveness isn't always a hug. Sometimes it's a mirror you hold up so they can see what they've done. The bathroom was quiet. The kind of quiet you only get when the party music is muffled by thick walls and heavy doors. I was touching up my lipstick, red, still bold, when the door swung open behind me. Vanessa. She didn't look like a bride. She looked like someone cornered. Her fists clenched at her sides, dress pulled up slightly so she could move faster. "What the hell was that?" she hissed, letting the door slam shut behind her. I turned slowly, placing the lipstick back into my clutch. "You'll have to be more specific." "Your little boyfriend's speech," she snapped. "You let him make a joke out of my wedding." I tilted my head. You made the joke, Vanessa. He just corrected the punchline. Her jaw tightened. You always do this. Always come out looking like the hero, no matter what. That made me pause. The honesty in her bitterness. It wasn't about love. It never was. You think this is about appearances? I asked quietly. You slept with my fiancé? I stayed silent. You invited me to your wedding? I still showed up. And you're angry because I didn't let you humiliate me? She didn't answer, just stared at me like I'd stolen something. And maybe, to her, I had. The narrative, the attention, the one moment she thought she'd finally be ahead. I spent my whole life being Sabrina's little sister, she said, voice cracking. At school, at home, even with him. He used to talk about you constantly, how organized you were, how confident. I was just a shadow. I leaned against the counter. Then why take him? I already knew the answer, but I wanted her to say it. Because for once, she whispered, I wanted to be the one someone chose over you. There it was. Not love, not destiny, just an old wound, dressed in a white gown. I should have felt angry, but all I felt was a quiet, bone-deep exhaustion. I never saw you as a shadow, Vanessa, I said. I saw you as my sister. She looked away. But you, I continued, voice steady, you didn't betray me to be with him. You betrayed me to be above me. And that says more about how you see yourself than how I ever saw you. Tears welled in her eyes, mascara already smudging. I ruined everything, she whispered. Even today, even now, I'm still not the one they're looking at. She sank onto the velvet bench near the mirror, shoulders slumped under the weight of her own choices. I stood there for a long moment, then quietly handed her a tissue. You should fix your makeup, I said gently. They're about to cut the cake. She gave a weak, ironic laugh, dabbing at the corners of her eyes. You still look out for me, she murmured. Old habit, I replied. But this time, my voice didn't carry softness. It carried boundary. Because this wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. It was reckoning. It was both of us seeing things clearly for the first time. We stood in silence. Two women who used to build pillow forts and defend each other on playgrounds. Now standing in heels, facing the aftermath of a lifelong competition neither of us ever agreed to enter. And as she walked out, I didn't follow. I didn't promise we'd be okay. I just watched her go, knowing something had shifted. Not just between us, but inside me. I wasn't the same woman who had once sat sobbing in an apartment, holding someone else's phone full of betrayal. I was something else now. And as I stepped back into the ballroom, head high, Noah waiting with a soft smile, I realized this story wasn't ending at her wedding. It was just beginning, on my terms. Sometimes the real victory isn't reclaiming what you lost. It's realizing you don't want it back. The reception faded into background noise. Laughter, music, the sound of clinking forks on wedding china. But I didn't hear any of it. I just saw Noah, leaning casually against the wall, talking to my father like they'd known each other for years. And something in that image, it anchored me. Not because it was romantic, but because it felt real. This wasn't a fantasy. This wasn't a dramatic rebound or an overcompensating upgrade. This was a man who had seen every fractured piece of me and stayed. Not to fix, not to prove, just to be. Later that night, as we left the ballroom, he reached for my hand. You did more than survive that, he said softly. You reclaimed your space. I smiled, because he wasn't wrong. There was a time I would have walked out of that wedding carrying bitterness like a second skin. But now, I walked out with my spine taller, my silence steadier, my heart not healed completely, but no longer hostage. In the weeks that followed, I didn't post revenge selfies. I didn't give dramatic speeches at family dinners. I just lived, quietly, fully, and on my terms. Vanessa and I didn't suddenly become close, but the next time she called, I picked up. Not because I forgot, but because I no longer needed to remind her. Cameron, on the other hand, faded. The last time I saw him, he looked like a man still chasing noise, still searching for something loud enough to fill the quiet I used to hold for him, but I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel longing. I felt nothing. And that truly was freedom. As for Noah, we didn't rush. There were no declarations under the stars, no sudden proposals, just mornings with coffee, afternoons with quiet conversations, evenings with laughter and dishes and plans for next weekend. He gave me a key, not just to his apartment, but to a version of life where I didn't have to prove I was lovable. I just had to be. And one evening, months later, as we sat on his balcony watching the city breathe below us, he turned to me and said, "You know, I would have fallen for you, even without the red dress." I laughed. "I would have worn it anyway," I said, because it wasn't about him, or her, or them. It was about me, choosing to rise without asking permission, choosing to speak, even when they hoped I'd stay silent, choosing to walk into rooms that once stripped me of dignity and walk out whole. So no, I didn't win him back. I chose myself forward. And if you're watching this wondering if you can do the same, if you've ever stood in a room where no one expected you to matter and stayed anyway, then hear me when I say this. Your power is not in how they see you. It's in how you see yourself. When no one is clapping. If any part of this story felt like yours, I'd love to hear it. Drop a comment below, because your voice matters here. And if you're ready for more stories of women rising, reclaiming, and redefining themselves, hit that like button and subscribe. You're not alone. And your next chapter? It starts now.